You push open the sod door at dawn and ask, what was daily life like for a plains homesteader in the 1890s Midwest? On this expanse of grass and sky, under the legal reach of the Homestead Act of 1862 and the growing lines of railroad, daily life begins and ends with the claim itself. You live on a 160-acre claim taken under that law, and much of what you do is shaped by the paperwork, the landscape, and the slow legal counting of time that will eventually earn you a patent to the land. To receive that patent, you must file at the county land office and then remain in actual residence and cultivate the ground for 5 years. The whole rhythm of household work, equipment choices, and even the structure of your shelter exists in relation to those requirements. Timber is scarce on the prairie. Trees gather along streams and in pockets of creekside coulees. But for miles at a time there is grass and soil without lumber. That scarcity determines your first practical decisions. Instead of building with boards, you and others like you cut sod, thick blocks of prairie turf held together by roots, and use those blocks to stack walls. The result is the sod house, a shelter that insulates well against winter cold and summer heat, but requires regular maintenance, replacing eroded corners, patching leaks after rains, and keeping the roof from sagging. Inside, space is allocated to the essentials: a bed or two, a stove for heat and cooking, and shelving for tools, seed, and small stores. Rooms are small, every corner is a work surface. Breaking ground becomes a household preoccupation. The Homestead Act does not merely demand presence, it demands cultivation. So your first spring, and every year after, you turn prairie into fields. This is not an easy task. The sod that makes your walls also makes your fields tough. The prairie root mat is dense, and a crude wooden plow will not cut it. You use a steel plow, the newer tool that can slice through the packed turf and flip it to expose soil beneath. That plow is pulled by horses or oxen. Depending on what animals you could afford and what you could keep through winter, you will rely on the steadier ox or the faster horse. Harnessing, shoeing, and feeding those animals become as important as tending children or repairing roofs. The first work season after filing is a mixture of legal and physical labor. You must establish a cabin or dwelling. Often the sod house serves this purpose, to demonstrate residence. You must break a portion of the land and plant it to crops to show cultivation. You mark fences where you can get posts from fence rails sold by rail, or use the native grass sod to form crude windbreaks. Every furrow turned and every seed sown is both a household necessity for food and a step toward the 5-year goal that will make the claim yours. Daily routines are organized around chores that keep both the homestead and the claim in motion. Morning sees the animals fed and watered if you have livestock. Milking, if there are cows, is an early task, and the milk must be processed or kept cool by being placed in the shallow cellar of the sod house or buried in a cool box. Wood is scarce fuel, is prairie grass, dung, or coal hauled from a nearby town if you can afford it. Cooking is centralized, the stove food is preserved by salt, by drying, or by careful storage in cool, dark places. That practical economy shapes diet, clothing mending, and the household calendar. Water requires special attention. Wells may be hand-dug near the dwelling, and water is hauled by pail or tub. If you are fortunate enough to invest in a windmill, the windmill lifts water from a deeper well and stores it in a tank for livestock and domestic use. The windmill becomes a quiet, constant presence, translating prairie wind into a daily supply of water and easing one of the hardest tasks of homestead life. Without a windmill, the household revolves around hauling and conserving every drop. Tools accumulate slowly and with purpose. The steel plough is central for breaking sod and for turning reserves of prairie into workable soil. Harrows smooth the fields after ploughing. A binder or reaper may be a later purchase, often shared among neighbours or hired when harvest is large. Early seasons are done by hand, scythes and sickles, hoes and rakes. The cost of machinery is an economic pressure. You may save for years to buy a binder that will shorten harvest time and reduce crop loss, or you may arrange work parties with neighbours to share labour during the threshing of grain. Those cooperative arrangements matter. Labour is seasonal, and neighbours depend on one another in months of planting and harvest. Law and paperwork are part of the homesteader's life as much as the plough. You must file a claim at the county land office and keep records of residence and cultivation. Periodic visits from official surveyors or registrars, or the need to file additional affidavits, means that what you do within your fields has an audience beyond the family. Proof of continuous settlement could be required. That legal attention reinforces certain patterns. You must show a pattern of permanence, improvements on the land, crops, or at least sustained human activity. These requirements persuade many homesteaders to build more permanent appearing structures, to fence small garden plots near the sod house, and to establish orchards or shelter belts that will stand as evidence of cultivation. Children and women play essential roles in making the claim viable. Children carry water, tend poultry, and help in fields when old enough. Women manage food preservation, clothing repair, and the small-scale vegetable patch that supplements grain. Teaching is often informal. A small schoolhouse may be miles away, so schooling is a seasonal and community-based activity. The household is, in effect, a small production unit where everyone contributes to the work that keeps both family and legal claim alive. Economics are a constant pressure. You live at the edge of markets. Railroads promise access to town and to buyers, but railroads also determine what is profitable to plant. The farther you are from a station, the higher your transport costs, and the less cash you can expect for your grain. Savings and credit are managed carefully. You may buy seed in the spring on credit and hope that the fall harvest repays that debt. The price of machinery, the cost of feed for animals, and the price fetched at market for grain or livestock influence decisions about what to plant and how much to invest in additional horses, fences, or a windmill. Seasonality governs the work. Spring is for breaking and planting, summer for tending, weeding and mending, autumn for harvest, and the rush to store grain and secure winter fodder, winter for repairing tools, sowing and planning. In those winter months, you assess the claim's progress toward the 5-year mark. You also take stock of failures. A dry year that prevented good crop growth, a harsh winter that cost animals, the gnawing worry that a single string of bad seasons could force you to abandon the effort before the patent is granted. The landscape itself shapes choices. The sod that provides shelter also hinders cultivation, and the root mat that holds heat and water makes early ploughing backbreaking. Yet that same soil, once turned and planted, can be bountiful in good seasons. Many homesteaders learn to rotate plots, to leave pasture on some acreage, and to cultivate only what they can reasonably manage, often a few acres at first, then expanding as animals and equipment increase. The 160-acre scale is a legal standard, but many families find it more than they can cultivate at once. Some rent out or leave uncultivated portions as a hedge against lean years. Neighbour relations matter. Proximity to others affects labour sharing, the potential for communal barn raisings or threshing rings, and the means to get to a county land office to file necessary evidence. Where neighbours cluster, social life forms. Church gatherings, schoolhouses, and fairs where goods and information are exchanged. These gatherings also become sites for practical exchange, buying and selling used ploughs or a spare horse, finding a binder for hire, or organising cooperative threshing. By the time your 5 years draw near, much of daily life still looks the same, but there is a different tone to work. You are no longer merely surviving, you are proving permanence. The sod house that sheltered a first winter, the furrows turned by the steel plough, the animals fed and kept through lean times, all of these become testimony to a settled life. The county land office will consider testimony, and records improvements and cultivated acreage will count. If all goes as intended, the patent will arrive, and the land will no longer be a claim, but a title you hold. As dawn gives way to another day on the claim, chores follow in ordered sequence. The animals, the stove, the small patch of crops nearest the house, the repair of a harness, or the sharpening of a ploughshare. Each task is both practical and legal work toward a future that the Homestead Act promises but does not guarantee. The sod house, the steel plough, and the steady pull of horses or oxen are the tools by which you translate prairie into ownership. As spring advances into the busy months of planting and tending, the work widens, and the season's choices will press you to balance household needs with the continuing obligation of cultivation that will, after 5 years, make the claim truly yours. You organise the year-around spring planting and autumn harvest. The homestead claim shapes almost every choice you make. What you sow, how many animals you keep, where the garden goes, and when a loan might be due. Spring is measured in soil and weather more than by calendar. The first work after winter is repair, mending broken fence wire, sharpening ploughshares, greasing wheel hubs, oiling the binder's moving parts if you were able to buy one. The horse-drawn implements that pull a furrow or cut a swath, demand care harness leather, will be checked and rechecked, and the team of horses kept fit with exercise and feed. Where you could not afford a binder or reaper, hand labour or borrowed equipment fills the gap where you could. The mechanical binder shortens the harvest season, but adds a new column to the ledger. Planting begins when the ground warms enough to accept seed without heaving. Corn and oats are set in rows you made with a horse-drawn planter, or by hand. Wheat is broadcast or drilled depending on the tool you own and the method that suits your acreage. The rhythm of seeding is deliberate because a missed window is lost yield. Too early risks a late frost. Too late means crop outruns the season's moisture. You time haying between rain spells. The hay must be cut, raked and stacked while the clover and timothy keep their leaf and nutritional value. With fewer hands on many claims, neighbours plan together so teams and machines may be shared at peak moments. Daily chores fall into a steady pattern. Morning begins with milking and feeding. A wife or mother collects milk and sets it to cool, checks on the vegetable patch, churns butter if the cream has set, and tends any small hens that supply eggs. Men and older boys harness the horses, hitch to the plough or the harrow, and ride out to check the furrows left in the night by frost or by wash. Fields are walked for weeds and pests. In the heat of summer, cultivation between rows keeps the soil loose and the young plants from choking competition. Repairing barbed wire fences is a frequent task. A broken strand lets stock through or lets neighbors' cattle graze your young grain. Barbed wire, when first strung, transformed both work and landscape. It gives you control of small paddocks and protects seedings, but it also requires constant attention. Posts rot, wire sags, storms bring down stretches that must be reset by hand, post by post. Water governs much of your labour. The windmill is the apparatus most likely to change a homestead's prospects. A standing windmill pumps groundwater into a cistern or trough and allows you to water a garden, supply drinking water for animals, and avoid a daily trip to a distant creek. You maintain the windmill tower, and its sails, a broken gear, or a chewed rope is not a problem you can delay. The windmill extends the season for certain crops and for livestock, making life less dependent on surface streams and the precise placement of homestead claims near rivers. Grain handling shapes the autumn calendar. Where rail towns cluster with grain elevators, your work will bend to the timetables they set. Grain elevators collect, weigh, and store the harvest brought in wagons from surrounding farms, and they link you to regional and national markets. Harvest timing thus becomes a calculation of storage and shipment, when to thresh, when to harvest, and when the railroad is scheduled to take a load away. If the elevators are busy, you may have to hold grain in a bin on your own yard, protected from mice and moisture until a siding opens. The presence of a local elevator can be a relief, less processing on the farm, but it also introduces new pressures. Contracts and cash advances mean you must meet a deadline. A late harvest risks lower prices or the loss of a train allotment. Mechanization alters social expectations as steadily as it reduces labor. A mechanical reaper or binder speeds the job and reduces the number of hired hands you must find, but it demands capital and practical knowledge. When you buy a binder, you also buy belts, knives, pulleys, and the relationship with an implement dealer a day's ride away. Broken parts must be replaced quickly in harvest time or the whole operation slows. Sometimes a community gathers to help with harvest. Neighbors come with horses and teams, and the binder, like a threshing machine later in the year, moves from place to place. Yet that cooperation rests beside the hard reality that not every family can afford the newest devices. Labor arrangements are shaped by scale and means. Smaller claims depend on family labor. Women and children keep up the house and garden, churn butter, mend clothing, bale wool, and manage the cellars and preserves that will carry the household through winter. Men handle the heavier field work, the ploughing, the fence mending, the larger repairs, and the trips to rail towns for supplies or to market. Larger operations hire seasonal hands for planting and harvest. Children contribute according to size and strength, bringing in eggs, herding calves, running errands to town, or attending school in winter and farm work when weather allows. The calendar of a district, teachers, churches, and community events shifts to accommodate harvests and threshing. Weather and the land push decisions in visible ways. The short, variable rainfall of the plains makes fallow years a constant threat. Dry spring alters what you plant and how much you set aside for seed. You plan rotations around what the soil will bear and around erosion concerns. Haying must be done when moisture is right, lest stacks rot, and winter feed must be calculated carefully to last through heavy snow. A late frost can wipe out a promising stand of corn. A heavy rain during harvest can rot wheat in the field. These contingencies force conservatism. Seed smaller, keep reserves, diversify between grain and livestock where the claim allows. The homestead household is both factory and refuge. In the house, women turn grain into flour and meal, preserve fruit and vegetables in jars, salt and smoke meats for winter, and keep accounts of sales and purchases. Evening hours are for mending garments, making soap, preparing next day's meals, and reading if someone brings a newspaper or a school reader. The house itself is a centre of constant repair. Roofs get shingled, windows are patched, and stoves demand sweeps and adjustments. Fuel is wood or coal delivered occasionally, and the stove's care is as much a part of survival as the plough's maintenance. Social life ties into work patterns. Church services, weddings, and local fairs are scheduled with an eye to the field calendar. A district's 4th of July picnic, for instance, may follow harvest when people can afford the time. Rail towns and their grain elevators serve as hubs not just for trade, but for news. A trip to the elevator might coincide with a visit to the feed store, a doctor, or an attorney. It is where you learn about prices, about offers from buyers, and about the weather further west that affects market rates. The arrival of a threshing outfit or a steam-powered threshing machine becomes an event neighbours contract for its services, pay in cash or share of the grain, and gather to see the work done in a matter of hours instead of weeks. Credit and cash flow contour decision-making. Buying a mechanical binder requires either savings or credit. Payments fall to harvest time when cash for items like bolts or new shoes comes from grain sales. The elevator again becomes central. It offers storage and sometimes advances on future crops, but with that advance comes obligation. Price shifts in distant markets mean that a success one year can be a loss the next. This uncertainty pushes families toward thrift in household habits and toward risk in crop choice, hoping that one good year will cover several modest ones. As autumn deepens, the emphasis turns from fieldwork to processing and protection. Grain is stacked and watched, fences are tightened for winter snows, and livestock are grouped for easier feeding. The binder's work ends and threshing begins, often with visiting crews. Surplus that cannot be sold is stored in granaries or loaned to neighbours in exchange for labour. Children return to school when frost and feed permit winter offers different kinds of labour: mending, bookkeeping, and tool-making in the shop. That's slower. Rhythm is a chance to prepare for the next planting. Seed is sorted and saved, horses are shoed, harnesses are overhauled, and the list of needed parts for the binder is carried to town. Through these cycles, the homestead claim continually proves itself as much a legal and economic arrangement as a place to live. Barbed wire, windmills, the horse-drawn plough and the mechanical binder, and the grain elevators of rail towns are not mere equipment. They shape daily choices and the timing of labour. They create dependencies and they structure social obligations. You find that efficiency in one area brings new responsibilities in another. A binder can harvest quickly, but obliges you to market your grain on a schedule. A windmill brings water but requires vigilance. An elevator saves labour on the farm, but places your crop within a larger market system you must monitor. By the time leaves fall and the last wagon is emptied at the elevator, you look ahead with the measurements of the past year in mind. You repair what failed, tally what you bought on credit, and consider whether a machine might make the next season less punishing. The homestead's routines are not merely about surviving each day, but about setting the family and the land up for the next cycle, planting in spring, harvest in autumn, so that the claim can sustain another year of work and another season of hope. You live by a rhythm set as much by timetables and papers as by sun and soil. In late summer or early autumn, when the combines are scarce and the wagons full, a trip to the nearest grain elevator will shape the week's work. The elevator sits by the rail line because it must. Your wheat or corn only reaches distant markets by rail, and the elevator is the place where farmers and railroads meet. You hitch the team, load the wagon, and follow the county road to the depot. A man there steps you onto the scales, takes a sample from the wagon, and notes the weight and grade. He holds out a warehouse receipt, proof that so many bushels of a named variety now belong to you, held in the elevator's bins until they are shipped. Those receipts mean more than accounting. They are a commodity in themselves, used to secure short-term loans from merchants or country banks. Credit is a constant thread through homestead life. Seed and hardware must be bought before the harvest, often on a running account. When the harvest comes, many farmers face a choice: sell at once to pay debts, or keep the grain in storage and wait for a better price. Storage is not free. The elevator charges a handling fee and a monthly storage fee. The longer the grain sits, the more interest on any loans accumulates. Leaving grain on the farm brings risk of spoilage or rodents. Keeping it at the elevator means a measurable cost, but greater security and the potential to sell in bulk at a moment when prices improve. Rail freight rates are the other unpaid tax on the prairie. The cost to move a carload of wheat or corn is set by the rail lines, and those rates dictate the effective price you get in Chicago, St. Louis, or other terminal markets. The Interstate Commerce Act of 1887 marked a turning point by creating the Interstate Commerce Commission to curb plainly unfair practices, like secret rebates that favored big shippers. In practice, the law alters some behavior, but does not cure every problem. The rail lines are skilled at dividing business among themselves and at drawing tariff distinctions that maintain higher rates for the small shipper. The ICC can investigate and order relief, but appeals and delays often dilute its effect. For a plains homesteader, that means freight rates remain a major factor beyond personal control. When a siding is full, when a car is late, when the nearest agent charges more for loading, those circumstances roll directly into the account book. The Panic of 1893 sharpens these problems. Banks fail, credit tightens, and commodity prices fall as national and international demand slackens. Local country banks that once extended modest lines of credit reduce lending or collapse entirely. Merchants tighten accounts or demand payment in specie. For the farmer, the result is immediate. The price on the telegraph price board reads lower than last month's estimate, and lenders call in notes. Some farmers, facing cash shortfalls, sell grain immediately at depressed prices to satisfy mortgage or supply debts. Others attempt to store and ride out the slump, but storage charges and the cost of borrowed money may make that unprofitable. The panic reveals a simple arithmetic. The margin between what the market pays at harvest and what it might pay later can be eaten up by freight, storage, commission, and interest. Within this squeeze, farmers look for leverage. Cooperative elevators and marketing associations are practical responses to the same pressures that push men and women to the depot. A cooperative elevator is owned collectively by farmers rather than by a private company. It receives members' grain, pools it, and negotiates with rail lines and commission merchants as a single, larger seller. The scale matters. A carload sold by the cooperative travels as a single lot, often avoiding some of the small shipper surcharges that apply to scattered lots. Cooperatives also retain more of the elevator's handling margin for the members, rather than allowing a private elevator man or commission house to capture it. If several farmers at the township level can align their harvest and hold together, they can ship in larger, less costly lots and sometimes obtain better terms. Political associations and education accompany these economic moves. The Farmers' Alliance gathers local producers to discuss practices and policies. Meetings emphasize not only technical matters, soil improvement, rotation, machinery, but also how to manage credit and market risk. The Alliance spreads the notion that collective action can limit some of the disadvantages of isolation. In some counties, Alliance members form cooperative storehouses and exchange systems that shorten the chain between producer and consumer. The Alliance is also a forum for ideas about reforms on the national level. Tighter regulation of rail lines, more effective enforcement of the Interstate Commerce Act, and proposals like federal warehouse systems that would let farmers secure low-interest loans while their grain remained stored under public supervision. You weigh these arguments at the country store or at the Alliance meeting house. Selling immediately wipes a debt storing risks further loss, but offers the chance of better returns. The math often decides. If freight rates are high and terminal prices low, immediate sale may be the only feasible path to keep the mortgage current. If a cooperative elevator can hold grain longer for lower fees, or if an alliance resolution promises better collective terms, a farmer may decide to wait. Many households divide decisions within the family. Portions of the crop might be sold to pay pressing bills, while other parts are placed in bonded storage to gamble on a price recovery. Mechanics of marketing are part habit, part calculation. Telegraph offices and newspapers provide price information. Rail agents announce incoming car availability. Grain inspectors sample carloads and assign grades that determine lump sum prices. Commission merchants in market cities weigh and dry samples and take commissions for selling on an exchange. Those fees are more manageable when negotiated by a cooperative rather than by an individual. Some cooperatives advance a portion of the expected sale price to members against their warehouse receipts, creating a short-term loan alternative to the merchant's credit. Yet cooperative success depends on trust and timely coordination. If members need cash at different times, or if a few members sell out early to pay debts, the collective advantage weakens. Legal and financial instruments fill the space between farm and market. Warehouse receipts become collateral, and cropland arrangements allow merchants to hold claims on the harvest before it leaves the field. These practices are double-edged. They enable a farm to operate through a year of deferred cash flow, but they also permit creditors to press claims if prices fall or harvests fail. Foreclosure becomes a grim possibility in a bad year, and the memory of land lost to unpaid notes feeds the political impulse that grows through the 1890s. Railroad practices remain under scrutiny. Even after 1887, rail lines sometimes favor certain large purchasers with lower rates or hidden rebates. Local agents may charge fees that are technically legitimate, but de facto raise costs for small shippers. The ICC's rulings can be slow and are not always decisive. Farmers and cooperatives, therefore, do what they can locally. Build better roads to a railroad with lower rates, consolidate shipments with neighbours, or petition state commissions for relief. Alliance. Conventions aggregate complaints and formulate legislative proposals. These tactics are partial remedies, useful at the margin, but seldom enough to overturn the structural pressures of distant markets and national financial panics. The Panic of 1893 does more than lower prices. It alters credit culture. Lenders become cautious, and interest rates for those still able to borrow climb. Merchants and manufacturers who once offered liberal accounts reduce their exposure. For homesteaders with recent claims still under mortgage or with land taxes coming due, the difference between a 4% and a 12% rate can determine whether the farm stays in the family. When cooperative structures can provide cheaper loans or defer interest by pooling resources, they create breathing room. When those structures are absent, families pivot toward immediate sale and short-term survival. The practical choices you make ripple into other routines. Labor arrangements change. Hired hands may be let go or kept on in slower months. Some families send a daughter or son to a town to find temporary work at a mill or on a railroad tie gang. Machinery purchases are deferred, or tools are shared among neighbours to limit outlay. These small economies reduce exposure, but also postpone investments that might increase future yields. In the most strained years, homesteaders attend auctions for discarded land and bargains in equipment, reshaping the settlement pattern of the county. Out of hardship come reorganizations of ownership and of how communities cooperate. By the close of the decade, many homesteaders understand that daily routines cannot be divorced from the larger financial and political world. The trip to the elevator, the choice between immediate sale and storage, the dealings with a rail agent or elevator man, they are practical acts with public consequences. Joining a cooperative or an alliance meeting is as much a household-level strategy as fixing a broken plough. Those local decisions feed into broader movements that seek to reshape freight policy, banking, and the terms on which a farmer can convert grain into cash. Life on a plains homestead in the 1890s is therefore an economy of continual judgment. You read the price tickers and the newspaper columns. You balance interest against storage, and you watch the rail lines that lift your crop toward distant markets. The Panic of 1893 highlights how fragile that balance can be. Credit evaporates, prices tumble, and families adjust. Cooperatives and the Farmers' Alliance offer a way to improve bargaining power and to share some of the burdens that freight and finance impose. Whether by selling at harvest to meet an immediate need or by storing under cooperative arrangements to await a better market, the household's decisions are practical responses to forces beyond the fence line. These responses, repeated across the plains, shape both survival and the changing politics of the region as the decade closes. On your homestead claim in the 1890s Midwest, daily life arranges itself into a set of shared duties that keep the household and fields functioning through the seasons. You and your household divide labor so that women take primary responsibility for food preservation, sewing, and the household production that keeps family life sustained. Children and neighbors pitch in with planting, harvest, and fence repair. Men carry the heavier work of plowing, managing draft animals, and major repairs. But where need demands, everyone works together. The seasonal peaks, planting in spring, harvest in autumn, and fence repair after storms, are managed by a flexible allotment of labour, reinforced by one-room rural schools, churches, and a network of reciprocal aid that reduces the burden of isolation. Food preservation structures your year. After the harvest, you organise canning, drying, salting, and storing so that the winter pantry will last. Women oversee these processes, but you expect your children and older neighbours to assist in gathering, washing, and preparing crops and meat. Glass jars are cleaned and arranged, fruit is peeled and packed, and roots are tucked into bins or cellars where you have them. Salted and smoked meat, rendered lard, dried apples, and bags of grain form the backbone of the household diet when the fields lie dormant. How well these tasks are performed determines the family's ability to ride out lean months, and it shapes decisions about how much to sell at market versus how much to keep. Sewing and mending are constant. You mend and make garments, turning worn clothing into patches and quilts that serve as bedding and insulation. Children learn early to thread a needle and to hem, and those skills become essential household capital. The workbench, the cutting board, a small iron, and a stock of thread and buttons are as important to daily survival as a ploughshare. Soap and candle making too are routine. Fat rendered into soap, tallow or beeswax crafted into candles, and herbal remedies prepared for common illnesses are household outputs you must produce. This self-sufficiency makes the claim less dependent on the mercantile wagon, and it also organizes time. Some tasks must be done daily, others seasonally. Children's contributions have both practical and educational value. From an early age, they carry water, feed poultry, gather eggs, and fetch kindling. As they grow, their tasks expand to planting, weeding, and helping harvest. Boys learn to repair fences and handle simpler tools. Girls are taught to sew, cook, and preserve. If a one-room rural school is within range, children attend classes in the gaps of the agricultural calendar. Winter terms are common, while they may miss weeks of school at peak planting or harvest. The schoolhouse is mixed and multifunctional. It teaches reading, writing, and arithmetic. But it also serves as a social center where news, technique, and advice circulate. When children come home from school, their work continues, and their learning is as much about labor and local knowledge as it is about book instruction. Churches organize more than worship, they are social lifelines. You attend Sunday services that bring families together from miles around. Meetings and occasional socials are where you exchange news, discuss crop prices and weather, and coordinate assistance when misfortune strikes. Church leaders and elders often help coordinate labor when a household faces illness or loss. When a barn must be raised or a harvest needs extra hands, the call is made through these networks. Mutual aid is the norm. Labor that you give to a neighbor will be repaid when your fields demand more hands. These reciprocal practices are as much insurance as they are moral obligation. Labor is seasonal and task-oriented rather than strictly hourly. In spring, the rhythm of your days is determined by ploughing, planting, and the vulnerability of young crops. Everyone who can work does so. Children may be excused from school for a week to help sow, and neighbors rotate teams to cover large plantings. In summer, attention shifts to tending, cutting weeds, and maintaining fences threatened by wind and grazing animals. Autumn concentrates effort on harvest, threshing, and the processing that follows. Canning, grain storage and meat preservation. Winter reduces outdoor labor but intensifies indoor production, mending, patterning, and teaching younger members finer skills. The slow season is when you prepare tools, repair wagons, and plan the next year's rotations. Mutual aid takes many forms. Beyond occasional work parties for ploughing, threshing, or barn raising, you rely on neighbors for daily contingencies. If an ox falls lame, a neighbor may lend a team until repairs or replacement are possible. When illness confines a household member to bed, neighbors bring hot food, take over milking, or mind children. These gestures are not casual. They are embedded in a web of reciprocal expectations. Hosting a threshing or a barn raising is a social contract. You supply food and coordination, your neighbors supply labor. The social credit you earn in these moments is part of a household's insurance against scarcity and misfortune. Practical economy and small-scale commerce shape how you manage resources. Surplus butter, eggs, and sewn goods may be bartered or sold in town for sugar, flour, or tools. Men travel to the railhead to sell larger quantities of grain or livestock, timing those trips to coincide with market information and weather. Cash is scarce credit with the local merchant, or informal barter arrangements substitute for ready money. The decisions about what to sell and what to keep weigh immediate needs against future security. A decision to sell grain for cash might fund a new plough, but could leave the household vulnerable if next season's seed supplies run low. Technology alters the household's rhythm in small but meaningful ways. A kerosene lamp extends the hours you can spend mending or reading, while an improved binder or horse teams make harvest less labor-intensive and allow a household to work a larger acreage. Yet new tools demand capital and shared knowledge. Adoption often follows demonstrations at church or school gatherings, or after a neighbor reports success. Roads, mail routes, and the occasional telegraph line reduce information isolation and allow you to respond to market signals more swiftly. But for most of your daily work, the key technologies remain hand tools and animals. The moral economy of thrift governs everyday choices. You reuse materials until they fail, salvage nails from collapsed fences, and store every useful scrap. A pattern for a dress may circulate through neighbors, and a new recipe for preserving beef or fruit may spread through quilting bees and schoolhouse conversations. Reputation matters. A neighbor's willingness to lend labor or extend credit depends on past reliability. Disputes are often resolved locally, with the school teacher, minister, or a small council of elders mediating disagreements about boundaries or stray animals. Formal legal recourse is distant and costly, so you rely on community enforcement and shared norms. Health and hardship test the limits of household endurance. Sickness can force a reallocation of labor that strains routine production. Young children or the infirm require time-consuming care, and neighbors step in to fill gaps where they can. In prolonged crises, some households sell off stock or mortgage tools and supplies to survive. The hope is that reciprocal networks and prudent saving will carry the homestead through temporary reverses. Without such networks, claims are harder to maintain. Through the long pattern of seasons, your household becomes a coordinated unit in which skills and obligations are distributed and reproduced. Women manage preservation, clothing, and the steady work of sustaining the home children and neighbors' supply. Supplemental labor at critical moments. Men handle heavy field work and repair. Schools and churches connect households across distance, making labor exchange and information flows possible. This combination of shared labor, practical skill, and reciprocal obligation is how a plains homesteader copes with labor peaks and with the isolation that defines life on the claim. Ahead lies an examination of how land policy and market pressures shape choices on the claim, and of what permanence on the plains often required of those who chose to stay. You begin the day at the few chores that never stop. Before the wind rises, you are out to the barn to check the teams, to feed and water the animals that make the whole enterprise possible. Draft horses or oxen stand bridled in their stalls, their harnesses are oiled, leather buckled and reins coiled. A draft animal is not a tool that can be put away. It must be groomed, shod, and steadied for a season of ploughing, hauling, or threshing. A pair that pulls well saves hours in the field and keeps the homestead moving from seed to sale. Most days are measured by maintenance. A sod house needs constant attention where grass and rain wear at the walls. A wood frame house requires chinking and painting when lumber is at hand. You mend roofs and patch cracks before winter, repair a leaky cistern, and keep the cook stove in trim so it will burn with the limited fuel on hand. Windmills and wells demand inspection. A broken pump in summer is an emergency. Before planting, you sharpen and repair ploughshares, grease the axles on the wagon, and see that the binder or drill will run when the time comes. At the heart of each task is the same logic. Keep the machines and structures reliable so a single season of weather or a bad market will not undo the claim you have worked to prove. Labours follow the rhythm of the seasons. Spring is for preparing ground and putting seed in the soil. With a horse-drawn plough, you turn the prairie sod where peat and roots hold moisture. Or, if the plot permits, a steel plough cuts more cleanly through tough prairie grass. When the weather allows, you harrow, level, and seed. Corn and oats may go in by hand, row by row, or with a seed drill that meters grain into furrows. Planting is not only the sowing of crops, but also the staking of next year's survival. Grain for sale, fodder for animals, seed for the following year, and food stored for winter. Summer keeps you alert to the pests of the plains and to weather that can make or break a crop. You check fences made of barbed wire, looking for stray cattle or a wind-bent post. Grasshopper swarms, drought or sudden heavy rains can thin a stand of wheat. You watch fields and act quickly where possible. Hay must be mown and cured in a narrow window, and you stack or rack it to keep it dry. A single hay harvest stands between animals, making through the winter, and a scramble of reduced rations. Autumn brings the principal labor of the year, harvest and market. You bind and shock grain, haul it to a threshing machine if community threshing comes through, or undertake a hired threshing crew together with neighbors. Threshing is a social and economic event, a moment when the output of many months suddenly becomes a commodity. The grain goes into sacks or bins, and then to the nearest elevator by wagon along dirt roads that become mud with rain, to a rail siding that connects your homestead to regional and national markets. Here, the instruments of prairie life meet the wider economy. Freight charges, elevator fees, and the grade assigned to your wheat determine what lands in your pocket for next year's seed and next week's groceries. Negotiation with markets is part practical, part constant anxiety. You watch grain prices in town, learn how freight rates alter the net return, and keep a line of credit at the general store. Merchants extend goods on account. Salt, flour beyond what you can grind, fabric, nails, knowing you will settle when the sale of corn or wheat comes in. That credit ties you to the town and to the railroad. When prices fall or the freight increases, the margin narrows. When drought cuts yields, the credit may become a lien. The homestead is a farm and a business, one that exists under federal rules about land and a marketplace run by rail companies and merchants. Keeping the homestead operating means a careful household economy. Women run much of that economy with work as continuous as farming tasks. Cooking from scratch, preserving meat and vegetables, churning butter, milking cows, and curing hams are daily and seasonal routines. Clothing is mended and made at the family loom or with a sewing machine. When one is afforded sewing, keeps garments serviceable through wear of chores. Laundry is a heavy labor done by boiling water in a kettle and scrubbing with lye soap, then rinsed and dried. The home is also the workshop. Furniture is repaired, implements sharpened, and small carpentry projects completed from a simple set of hand tools. Children are part of the labor picture. They gather eggs, carry water, tend small animals, and learn to drive the single horse cart in time. School attendance depends on distance, the immediate demands of the farm, and the seasons. A one-room schoolhouse, when it is within reach, offers basic literacy and arithmetic and becomes a place for the community to meet. For many families, the earliest lessons are not in the classroom, but in the fields and at the barns, learning to discern soil, weather, and animal behavior. Community matters. Neighbors fill gaps that the remote homestead cannot manage alone. House raisings, barn raisings, and threshing bees bring people together for common work. The assistance is reciprocal. You offer labor to help another family raise timber or stack hay, and they will answer you when you need a span of extra hands. A traveling peddler, the town doctor, a minister, the school teacher, and the postman form a thin web of services that connects the homestead to institutions and information beyond the fence line. Tools and technology shape the daily calculus. Barbed wire has made fencing practical for large tracts with less wood. Windmills pump groundwater for livestock and household use, turning distant wells into reliable water supplies. The binder or self-rake reaper shortens the day of harvest, but a binder requires oats or wheat. Mown at a particular stage, a misjudged harvest risks losses greater than the savings in labor. Threshing machines and steam engines pass through the township on contract hiring a crew or pooling with neighbors is a logistical decision made months in advance. At the same time, household technologies, cook stoves, kerosene lamps, and enamelware alter the experience of domestic labor and reduce some of its risk and unpredictability. Federal land law underpins the homestead's legal existence. A claim filed under the Homestead Act is not merely a paper exercise. It prescribes a pattern of residence, improvement, and cultivation that you must demonstrate. Living on the land, building a dwelling, and cultivating a portion of the claim for the prescribed time are conditions of proving the claim. The law's requirements shape your priorities. You settle whether land will support crops or pasture. You invest labor in a house and fences, and you keep records and witnesses to the work done. That legal framework is also the site of tension. Proving up can be delayed by illness, weather, or market distress, and the presence of rail lines and their influence on land values can push decisions about where to settle and what to plant. The economic forces of the region are never static. The value of a crop can swing with weather thousands of miles away, or with policy changes in distant markets. You learn to hedge by raising mixed crops, by keeping a few hogs that will convert waste into meat, or by growing a kitchen garden that reduces reliance on purchased food. Some homesteaders diversify by raising dairy or by selling timber from a small grove. Others are more vulnerable, tied to a single cash crop and local market conditions. Cooperative strategies, sharing threshing crews, building a local elevator, or forming grain associations, emerge in response to the instability of prices and freight. Such arrangements alter daily work only slowly, but they change the leverage homesteaders have in the regional economy. Daily life on a homestead demands practical knowledge that connects the plot of land to the rail timetable. Timing a wagon to arrive at the elevator before a freight train departs is as much an everyday calculation as timing a planting to follow a last frost. The conductor's schedule, the availability of a siding, the condition of the road after rain. These are details that are as immediate as the weather, and they enter into decisions about when to buy and when to sell. There is a rhythm to the labor that is not merely toil, it is a sequence of choices and responses, a craft learned in the manner of small economies. You learn which implements are worth their cost, which seeds suit your soil, and how to stretch stores through a lean winter. You learn to read sky and soil and animal behavior as seriously as a ledger. You accept a dependence on the rails for markets and on merchants for supplies, even while you cultivate independence on your claim. The work is continuous because the risks are continuous. Seasons change, markets shift, and machinery breaks. The homestead must be kept ready. When winter closes the fields, the work does not stop but shifts focus. You repair tools, mend harnesses, and make improvements that will save hours in the next season. You pare expenses, tally accounts, and plan seed purchases. Winter is the time of accounting, a quiet, urgent labor of preparation, and an occasion for the kind of community that arrives in the form of a neighbor bringing news or supplies across the snow. Inside the daily life of a plains homesteader in the 1890s Midwest, labor is the organizing principle. It is shaped by seasons and tools, by the ongoing care of animals and buildings, and by a legal and economic framework that ties your small farm to larger forces. You manage a household and a business at once, coordinating family labor, community help, and the machinery of a regional economy. It is, in short, hard, work-centered, and self-reliant, inseparably tied to federal land law, prairie technologies, and regional economic forces.